Oh, Maxine, it's so nice to have you. Really, quite seriously, it's really nice to have you on the show. I'm glad
Well,
you could get back
thanks.
in.
I've been listening to the show, and I want to thank all three of you because we continue. In fact, only today I was told by two ladies, I was at a funeral, and they said, we watch the Marcy Week show every evening, and we are learning so much. Unprompted, I was
Hmm.
just leaving the graveside to leave, and they stopped me, and that was it. And I think that sentiment is not unusual or peculiar to the two of
No.
them. I hear it all the time.
Hmm.
And you know what I say to them? I said, the people who do this show do it at, for free. Nobody pays anybody. Marcia does not have sponsors. Dave works very hard, and the Barbadians appreciate what you are doing, or should I say what we are doing, because I have to
Yes, ma'am.
include myself
Yes,
because
ma'am.
I'm here with you.
Yes. Yes.
And I want to say thank you because I hear it. I cannot go anywhere unless somebody says something to me about the show, and that is no exaggeration.
Very good.
Yes, I can concur with you, Maxine. Everywhere I turn, and I mean everywhere, supermarket, gas station, airport, no matter where I turn, I see people looking at me quite hard, and then they will come to me and say, "Are you Doctor Ferdinand?" And I would go, "Yes." They say, "Oh, we watch you, Marcia. We show, and
Right.
thank you for all your." We hear this all of the time, and we are really grateful. I certainly am for the opportunity, because it's a different season for me. I've been involved in Christian ministry a lot more than in this area, but I am the pot and he's the potter. So
Yes.
he
Mhm.
uses the vessels how he sees to do so. Now, Maxine, I know that you were scheduled to address a subject entitled Promises versus Reality. I don't know if I'm going to leave it in your hands to see,
Well,
because to be honest with you, I think it actually ties in
I was going
with
to tell you
almost
exactly that.
everything. Yeah,
That
yeah.
I was going to use all that I heard earlier to demonstrate and to illustrate
Yeah.
exactly when we talk about promises versus actual delivery.
Well,
When I listen,
let me
mm,
step back, and Apostle and Carolyn will give this young lady the opportunity to release her segment, and then we can join her a little later in terms
well,
of our involvement.
I take comfort from young because they say once a man, twice a child, once a woman, twice a child. So I feel like I'm coming around
Uh,
full circle.
that
So
makes
I hear
that
that.
makes two of us. That makes two of us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yes. But as
Yeah.
I listened to the show and I thought about all that was promised, and I listened to some of the skepticism about oil searches and so on, it just reminded me that in the past 8+ years, this administration has made a whole set of promises to Barbadians. They have indicated that they were going to do a number of things. Where we have dissected things like housing, and therefore one cannot help but be skeptical. Um, and in fact, if I start, well, I'll talk about oil, and then I will talk about what Apostle was talking about in relation to the in legislation in anti
Anti-gun.
what do you call it, anti-gun legislation.
Yeah.
The whole question of gun courts, etc. Anti-gang legislation, gang,
Anti-gang.
gang,
Yes.
not gun, anti-gang legislation. And I was very touched when I sat and I listened to the VOB program with Mr. Thorne, with Rob Thorne. And I will say this publicly. I trust that there is no pressure put on VOB and that new moderator, Mr. Philippe Amy, for having him on the program. I don't know if the moderators choose their guests or if the station, the program director or whatever, or whoever the person is managing that, if that person chooses the guests. But to hear Mr. Thorne speak to an issue that he has been advocating in Parliament and outside of Parliament for the past 2 years was important, because he made a critical point when we talk about promises versus delivery. Yes, we are at the stage of debating, well, not debating because there's no opposing voice, but discussing or speaking to a piece of legislation in Parliament. And I guess you would get some kind of debate in the Senate, and I would have heard um, opposition senators and the independent senators speak since our election. So you will get some kind of difference of opinion there. But in listening to him speak about it, my concern, and I think the concern of Barbadians, and we were hearing it just now, is one, my concern is that here we have a piece of legislation. Yes, the Barbados Police Service, police officers have been solving crime. So somebody gets shot, somebody gets stabbed, somebody gets beaten to death, somebody gets robbed. And in this case, we're talking about guns and murders and that kind of thing. The police solve that part. In other words, they're able to find the person who pulled the trigger. But we know in this country that the 16-year-old, I go back to the point that was made, the 16-year-old who murdered somebody, the 22-year-old who murdered somebody, that individual did not walk into Barbados or walk out of Barbados and walk back in with a gun. We hear of rental of weapons and all of those things. You would hear of police, and I always tell people, where several persons are charged with a crime, it is usually as soon as the police is able to find one or two, the others are. Because you know what it says to me, and the police may tell me otherwise, but what it says to me is once they get their hands on one of the perpetrators, sooner than later, the person speaks about what happened. So why is it that we can hear that John Brown was my accomplice?
Mm.
And I am sure the police might have heard, I didn't own this gun, because we even hear prices for renting in this small society. And I don't think these are numbers people make up. So the point I'm making is when we start to slant a debate or a presentation on one segment of the criminal network, and I choose the word carefully, a network, it's not individuals up there operating in isolation. So why is it that we cannot crack that? I was part of the Democratic Labour Party commission on crime that was referred to in the brass tacks program with Mr. Thorne and Mr. E.M.M.A. And there's a chapter talking about untouchables. And he went into some specifics from that, because we recognize that there are persons out there in the background who are party to this. They may not be out there sticking at nobody or shooting somebody or whatever, but there are probably the persons who are some of the major beneficiaries of the crime, whether it is drug trafficking, arms trafficking, etc. So I think when we talk about the promises, we will bring anti-gang legislation. But if that legislation does not allow the country to see a breaking up of the network, I use the word again, the criminal networks, and that we are dealing with what I would call like a drug mule. They deal with the ones at the bottom of the ladder, so to speak, and we're dealing with the ones who find themselves killing off each other or killing people, because I hear of contract murders and so on. So I think that is one of what I would call the difference between a promise and what is delivered. Now, of course, some people may argue this piece of legislation is now being debated and it has to be put in place. But if you debate a piece of legislation and your focus is on only a small or a specific segment, then we have problems.
Mhm.
So that is how I would illustrate one of the problems. One of the things that I want to talk about, I'll talk about. Let me pause there. I don't know if Apostle, you want to respond to any of what I said, or Carolyn, or
Carolyn, did I see your hand go up just now or something?
Yes,
and a
yes.
smile on her face.
Yeah.
I wanted to say something. Now, I was listening very carefully. If I did not know that the legislation was so, in depth, I would be led based on the debate in the House and the name of the legislation, anti-gang legislation. If I was a gangster, I would think, well, Mr. Thorne and the DLP coming up with some kind of legislation against us. And it seemed to have been portrayed as this is what they want us to do to you all. And the debate is on just who we call perhaps the gangsters. Let's give them stiff penalties. Let's go after them. Let's make sure that they are no more gangs. Let's break them up. Let's, let's break them up. Let's lock them up. Let's punish them. And it would seem as if the attack is against the regular poor individuals. And yes, this attack is being spearheaded by the opposition or by the Democratic Labour Party and Mr. Thorne. This is what I saw coming through. This is what I hear coming through. This is what I was picking up, and this is what I am feeling. And therefore, when the time comes, these people are going to fix the Democratic Labour Party and Mr. Thorne. Now, knowing the entire legislation, it looks as if, and I would say this, if I had to come up with, I was forced to come up with legislation against my acquaintances, I said I'm forced to come up with the legislation against my Sally. I am getting the pressure, shooting after shooting. So I am forced. I am forced. It ain't like I want to. I am forced to do this. What I will do, yeah, I'll braid it up. I'll put it there. But I will focus on the part that does not touch my people. And I will beat on that part all the time to the extent that other persons are agitated. Because I have to come out of this looking good. And that is what I picked up from just concentrating on that part of the legislation, just debating that part. And I'm glad that Mr. Thorne had the opportunity, and I would say,
yes,
and he had the opportunity to come and defend and let persons know that there's more to the legislation than what is being debated or what is being said or what is being acted upon that there is more, and not make people think that he is anti against the little poor boy in the street running around with the guns. So I'm glad he had that opportunity, because as I sit and I listen, and that is just my opinion. I'm not saying it is so. It would seem to me that was the agenda. And I'm glad, Mr. Thorne, if you're hearing, I'm glad that you got the opportunity to speak up and to speak out and to say what the legislation is in full. Because these guys that are running around with the guns, they're not going to read anything. They are going to be listening to what is said. They are just listening to the words and the little snippets that they get and that they throw for them to influence them. They're going to get that. So when they hear the debate, they're going to think, okay, Mr. Thorne, you and your people and Furley the peace and all, this is what you all want them to do to me. And not that they want to do it. This is what you want them to do. They're forced to, they're forced to do this to us because of you. And that is the angle that I am seeing it at. Again, I said it is just my view.
Mm-hmm. Maxine, I'd like to ask you a question if I can. I don't know if you heard my comments relative to, because you were Minister of Foreign Affairs, is that right?
Right.
I think you were Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Yes, I was. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you heard my comments relative to external elements being invited to engage this process. I don't know what is involved in it in terms of, a government fulfilling what they're promising. As you know, I know that one of the primary responsibilities of government is the security and protection and safety of its citizens. But what would be involved? Suppose we wanted, as a government, to seek the assistance of the FBI, CIA, or whoever the relevant authorities would be that could act independently of any influence within the context of Barbados. That's what I'm actually getting at, because there's a sense in which people just don't trust the Barbadian context, government, nobody to get this done. What would be involved in something like that?
I think basically countries have bilateral agreements. So you might have an agreement between Barbados and the US, Barbados and the UK, Barbados and Canada, or where you mutual, I'm trying to remember the exact title, but in essence, where you can call upon them for assistance. And there will be certain agreed approaches as to how that can happen. I think what you're saying is that in a small country, we face the reality that the place is so small that we know each other, people are related, neighbors went to school together, whatever, and there may be some reluctance. And I think that may be part of it. If I would suggest that is more likely to be the case among the people who ordinarily are arrested and charged for criminal activity. I think part of what people have expressed fears and concerns about, because I say this in the context of the research, that we didn't sit down in a room and write a document. It was based on interviews and things of that nature. So in essence, in talking to people, people were saying, look, the guy on the street, the poor guy, the fellow who lives, in certain parts of the island, who catches a bus to go to work and whatever, gets involved in criminal activity, that individual is charged, arrested, whatever the process happens. But there are some people who are of significant influence or means in terms of financial means, etc., who may be involved. And, we hear a lot of anecdotal things. I will suggest that there may be anecdotal evidence, or there may be rumors and speculation, things people hear, and people observe things, because it's a small community. But people are concerned that somehow, and that's where, within the context of that report, we spoke of untouchables, some people seem to be able to get away with things. You might hear of a case and or suspicion or suspects, and somehow things seem to disappear or never come up at all. So I think part of the call for help, let me put it this way: what we probably need is a willingness to deal with whoever. In other words, as I say, let the fall where they will. I think that's the expression. That if something comes up and persons are suspected, that you go through the people, the proper procedures, and those persons, if found to be involved, that they face, the legal system like everybody else. And I think that is it, that there's that the law is quote unquote blind, as we say it's supposed to be, and justice is allowed to occur. So to answer the question again, yes, we can call on other jurisdictions, or agencies and officials in other jurisdictions based on agreements that we have. But I think part of it also has to be a willingness to follow the trail wherever it takes you, if that makes sense.
No, it does, because it's just that I've observed, not just in Barbados, I've observed over the last couple of years, particularly through the pandemic, a continuous decline in trust of governments at every level, and it's global. I don't think it's just here. I think it's happening across the world. It certainly is happening through the Caribbean. I've seen it in several other countries, and I just wondered, if we are serious about it, if we are serious about resolving the matter, that if it's possible, we could use persons from another jurisdiction that could be deemed objective and not capable of being influenced and directed by. Of course, I know there would have to be certain agreements and so on put in place, for those kind of things to happen. I just wondered about that. Nevertheless, go ahead, Maxine, because our time is flying by so quickly, and I do want to take a few minutes before we end to touch back on the matter to do with the oil. Because Apostle really was supposed to do that.
I'm going to speak to that, because I also see that as a situation where promises are made. And let me say that this whole exploration is not new. I think you mentioned under the E.M.M.A administration, and I will say that the whole issue of negotiating with prospective investors was also taking place. And let me also say that, to me, there is no necessary contradiction between a commitment to a green economy and a reliance on fossil fuel. I mean, on renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuels, and the exploitation of oil and gas reserves. And I say this as somebody who had to sit down and listen to a number of my counterparts and heads of state of countries in the UK, in the European Union, in the EU, talking to Africans and people from the Caribbean, etc. Because I think there's a recognition that the targets that have been set, those targets for being 100% renewable energy reliant, are proven to be unrealistic. I think somebody mentioned the whole issue of what's happening in countries in Europe.
Yeah, in Europe, I was the person who mentioned that.
So there are two things. One, the likelihood of such a transition in the short to medium term, it is very low. Secondly, The reality is that a lot of fossil fuel reserves are in developing countries. Africa, you mentioned Africa, you talked about
Yes.
Angola, you can come to the West Coast. Nigeria has
Yeah.
been producing
Namibia.
oil. It's
I think
only now
Namibia is starting drilling.
Namibia and all of these
Yeah.
countries. I mean, Uganda, I think, have had some finds. Ghana is about to exploit theirs. You've had Equatorial Guinea, which is almost like an island off the coast, but
Mhm.
a part of it in West Africa. The unfortunate reality is when you look at Nigeria as the largest of the countries and producers, for years would have been shipping their crude oil unprocessed and buying refined oil, bringing it back into the country. Fortunately, and he got some pressure from the entrenched interest in the country. He's the richest man in Africa now, Dangote. He built
Yeah.
a 20 billion or whatever refinery, and that is in fact, with all that is happening in the Middle East now, that is what is saving Nigeria, because they would have had extreme difficulty sourcing refined oil. And so my take on it is that while onshore, we should continue to pursue a renewable energy agenda. Ironically, and I think you mentioned this, Pastor Ferdinand, that while we have electric cars, what are they charged on? They are charged
Mhm.
on fossil fuel generated electricity generated using fossil fuels. So in essence, my take is this: there will be a continued global reliance on fossil fuels. What concerns me, and I think I read this into what Carolyn was saying, can I trust the government based on its track record, not even going back to, let's say, Oinata's administration and before, the one now, the current iteration
Yeah.
of the Barbados Party government? Can I
Yeah.
trust them to deliver if they have not been able to properly deliver housing projects, if they've messed up educational issues? But what I would say is what will be critical would be the selection of the partners, because it's not going to be Barbadians going out there to drill. Because one of the things that has been pointed out based on the location of Barbados is the fact that we are looking at deep oil in deeper waters than near shore or onshore oil, because we have drilled oil in Barbados